Scold is a 24 PP special water type move with 80 base power and 100% accuracy. Off that description, it sounds kind of bad, but you still haven't read the secondary effect, this being one which burns the opponent 30% of the time. To give a direct comparison, Focus Blast has the same chance at missing, and since Focus Blast lands about as often as my parents succeed at getting back together, Scold ends up being very strong. To recap any of you new-gen players, Burn used to do 12% damage after each turn, which along with having the damage of physical moves made it quite strong. So strong in fact that people wanted it banned. I'm one of those people, and as such I want to give the argument that those people have for why they feel the way they do, as I want you to understand how we feel. This is because when Scold was introduced, it was brought upon the Weather generation. Due to this, Scold, which would normally be a move with mediocre power, became extremely powerful in rain. To add to this, the only type immune to burns is Fire, and Fire is a type weak to Scold. But hey, at least you can get around that by running a bulky Fire type, except for the fact that Fire types suck at tanking things due to their Stealth Rock weakness. Okay then, why not use Heatran? I mean, it's got a Stealth Rock neutrality. Well, that's great and all, but it's still weak to Scold. And this is only made worse by how much Rain teams love spamming the move. Rain boosted Scolds are just one thing too, as it even struggles to take them from Sand teams, given how Gastrodon can hit it with Earthquake. The only other user it really checks then is Jellicent, which is only an okay matchup to win. Okay then, Heatran might not be a good Scold sponge, but what about my special attackers? Burn only halves the damage of physical attacks, so they don't mind being burned, right? Well, actually, they do. Let's take Latios for this example, since it's an incredibly powerful special attacker with a resistance to Scold. Now, of course, Latios wants to be in the game as long as possible, so it can properly nuke things. Sure, if it's burned, then it would still be able to hit as hard as it was before, but it would now be on a timer. Combine that with Stealth Rock and Sandstorm damage, and you have a Pokemon who can only switch in 4 more times before dying. And that's not accounting for the damage it would take switching in to begin with. Sure, 4 turns sounds like a lot at first, but it's really not. Games in singles tend to last longer than in doubles, even when both players are using Hyper Offense, so any turns lost by a Scold burn are huge. You may think that it would be more generous to use Keldeo as an example then, as it has a Stealth Rock resistance, but then you'd have to remember that it's vulnerable to spikes. This is also the reason that Guts users like Conkeldurr are also poor options. Okay then, if special attackers aren't a good way of beating Scold, then what about physical attackers? I can't believe you asked that question. But hey, at least there's one decent Scold sponge, and that would belong to defensive Pokemon, particularly ones who can shrug the burn off with reliable recovery. Which, yes, means that for Hawthorne, most teams' de facto defensive option is also an ineffective Scold sponge. The Pokemon who are more effective then are Celebi, Jirachi, and Starmie. Ignore the fact that 2 of these 3 have fallen off though, as we finally found an effective Scold sponge. What do you mean Jirachi only runs Wish 36% of the time? You may think we're completely starved for answers at this point, but fear not, as there is a select group of Pokemon completely immune to Scold. These are Alakazam and Reuniclus, who use Magic Guard to not take any damage from burns, along with Jellicent and Gastrodon, who use their Water-type immunity so that they can only fear Will-O-Wisp. Now, Alakazam dies to a bubble from Mega Beedrill, but hey, it's something at least. After all that searching, we finally found 4 Pokemon who can switch into Scold without dropping a sweat. So, hopefully that was a convincing enough argument for Scold being broken. If anything, I'm shocked it wasn't banned. So, why wasn't it? Well, remember that percentage I mentioned earlier? So yeah, it's because of this that Scold won't even always burn you. Now let me tell you why this is even worse than the move burning you 100% of the time. This is because it adds in too much luck to the game. Of course, RNG is unavoidable in Pokemon. Hell, it's part of what makes the game so exciting. It becomes a problem though when the game is too centered around it. Hell, 30% isn't even that bad, which is why you won't see good players risking burns on many other Pokemon. It's simply not worth it. You must keep in mind too that since games last so long, Scold will be used repeatedly, which minimizes the luck factor too. All this is to say that the chance is so low so it's not broken argument is a load of poo-poo. You may wonder why moves like Thunder or Lava Plume aren't broken then, and it's because the number of Pokemon who can safely switch into them is significantly higher. Another aspect is that these moves are far more rare. Lava Plume has low distribution, while Thunder's low accuracy makes it worse than Thunderbolt. The theme of Scold is that it has far higher distribution as a whole. As such, let's go through the painstaking task of analyzing every Scold user. Gastrodon is a defensive Scold user. It poisons special attackers with Toxic and cripples physical attackers with Scold Burns. This is an insane level of utility, which makes it very hard for any Pokemon to switch into it, and it's one which every defensive Scold user can abuse. It's for this reason that Politoed is also so good, with it even being genuinely threatening due to its Drizzle ability guaranteeing a rain boost from the move. I guess the same could be said about Tentacruel, since you'd almost never switch it in outside of rain. On the offensive side of the spectrum, though, Scold is a recommended option for all but one Keldeo set, that set being the Choice Spec set, which prefers Hydro Pump and Surf for their greater damage and increased reliability. On every other set, though, Keldeo is able to use it to potentially cripple Pokemon it otherwise couldn't deal with. Okay then, I guess in Black and White there were only 4 Scold abusers in OU. It's not much, but trust me, we've only scratched the surface. But wanna know what you haven't scratched the surface of? Yes, you know where this is going. My sub count! Did you know that only 21% of you are subscribed? What do you mean you don't care? Well, I do care, because I want world domination. This Azurill will cry if you don't subscribe. Do you want Azurill to cry, you sussy baka? There, Azurill, you did nothing wrong. Now in return, you must make this Azurill smile, which you can do by liking, subscribing, and watching my other videos. Well, it looks like the content cop is out to get me for this plug being so long, so let's get back to your regularly scheduled garbage. Scold was nerfed in ORAS. Yes, you may be shocked to hear this, but in Gen 6, Scold can thaw frozen Pokemon. Wait, you're not impressed? Well, good, because Freeze was already nerfed so hard by this point that it wasn't at all a limiting factor in making the move less spammable. Now, I know you get the gist of how my argument will play out for the rest of the generations, so let's shake it up a little bit by starting with the abusers of Scold and what make them so good. What better Pokemon to start with then than Keldeo? I say this because this was the first generation where the power of Scold on Keldeo was truly enabled. This is because the power of Burns was finally discovered by the community, as many of Keldeo's checks like Latios would be severely neutered by Burns, limiting their ability to continuously switch into it over the course of the game. This is why it's easily one of the metagame's best Pokemon, and why it uses it on every set, including the Choice Spec set that it used to not run it on. Slowbro manages to be an excellent choice for staving off attacks from some of the scariest physical attackers in the game, and Scold is precisely why it's so good at that. On the utility set for Starmie, Scold is used as the chance for a burn is more valuable than the extra damage of Hydro Pump, as dealing damage isn't the purpose of that set. Volcanion has seen a resurgence in OU for its ability to break various walls and slower offensive Pokemon. Similarly to Keldeo, it does this by threatening burns even on Pokemon who would otherwise check it. Despite this, it doesn't use Scold, but instead uses its signature move Steam Erection, which unlike Scold has an incredible 110 base power. And that's all though. Just like Black and White, the users in OU are smaller than you'd think, but the move is still incredibly devastating, especially on Keldeo. I must also note that the combination of Toxic and Scold mostly died in ORAS, with the reason being that every Scold user is a lot more offensively inclined. Yes, this even includes Slowbro, who despite being defensive acts more as a pivot than a wall. With that note made then, I just want to throw the banhammer now, but I must not jump to conclusions. So let's revisit the categories of Pokemon who could potentially deal with Scold. On the Fire-type side, it's a significant improvement from the last generation. Of course, Heatran is only an okay stop to the move, given how most Scold users are inherently offensive this generation. It can only really handle Slowbro as a result. This generation shows promise though, with Talonflame. Okay, I'm joking. I actually meant the Mega Charizards. Mega Charizard X is a fire type not weak to Scald, and Mega Charizard Y is a fire type whose drought ability lets it effectively be neutral to the move. Unlike Ninetales in the last generation too, it's not completely hopeless defensively, as a fighting resistance is imperative in switching into Keldeo. Despite this, it's slower than Keldeo, which makes switching Mega Charizard Y in very prediction reliant and not even all that reliable. The same applies to Mega Charizard X, although it often carries Roost to heal itself, and when given a speed boost by Dragon Dance, makes it easily the best fire-type Scald answers in the generation, and one of the best Scald answers period. With that covered then, let's tackle special attackers, who are bad Scald answers for the same reasons as the last generation. I don't think I need to explain why for a second time, so I won't. That last sentence also applies to physical attackers if that wasn't obvious enough. In that case, let's finally discuss the defensive Pokemon who, with the help of reliable recovery, can deal with Scald. The list of Pokemon is actually quite large. In that case, let's start with Amoonguss, who matches up phenomenally against Keldeo and crumbles to the other users. Jirachi, who can once again use its niche Wish Set to shrug off Scald. Latios, who not only resists Scald, but can also recover the damage away, with the same applying to Latios, although it doesn't always run recover, and therefore is a lot less reliable. Despite this, both of them match up incredibly well against the available users, and can even threaten them offensively. Mew, on the other hand, handles Scald well for reasons that are rather obvious. It has good typing, good bulk, and reliable recovery. Slowbro resists Scald and has Regenerator and Slack Off to heal the damage off, even matching up well against the other users. Tangrowth is practically the same in that regard. Tornadus Therian isn't a great answer with its Stealth Rock weakness, but Regenerator at least helps. Mega Venusaur resists the move and can heal off the damage with Synthesis. Zapdos, unlike Tornadus Therian, isn't a great answer with its Stealth Rock weakness, but it at least has Roost. To give some credit, this is at least a far better selection than with Black and White, but it's not perfect. I just listed an impressive 9 Pokemon, yet only 6 of them can consistently get the job done against a majority of the users, which, while not awful, is still a far cry from what I'd want to see. In that case, let's discuss the Pokemon who are immune to burns or water-type attacks. Chansey has Natural Cure to remove the burn upon switching out. Despite this, since it can't run leftovers, a burn can still overwhelm it. It also fears Keldeo like nothing else. Clefable is one of the best answers then, with Magic Guard allowing it to ignore burn damage outright, with great matchups against Scald users and reliable recovery. Starmie, like Chansey, has Natural Cure, and even has reliable recovery. Then finally, Volcanion is immune to water-type moves, as it has the Water Absorb ability. Okay then, we finally, for the love of Arceus, have that finished. As you can tell by the absurd length of this paragraph, Scald has a lot more options. It's not nearly as stupid as it is in Black and White as a result. Okay then, my argument is null now, right? Well, no, because Keldeo exists. I've talked about how much I hate this Brony OC various times, and just like in Black and White, it invalidates so many of its checks. Skull is the reason Keldeo is so stupid in ORAS OU, and it's the main reason why I still think Skull is ban-worthy. Now, I know what you may be thinking, and I don't think banning Keldeo would fix the problem. Despite this, I think both sides of that argument are perfectly valid. They're at least more valid than the people who don't see an issue at all. Speaking of which, Scald was actually suspect tested in UU. Now, I'm not going to explain why UU specifically, as this video is already long enough, but it just goes to show how hated this move is. Despite this hatred though, the suspect test was unsuccessful, mainly because the alternate ladder they made without Scald was played by no one, as not even pro-ban players would want to play in a ladder that wouldn't last to begin with. I hope I constructed myself well then, because it took me way too long to explain all that. Hopefully, it won't be that way with USUM. And it won't be. USUM is the first generation of OU where I think Scald is balanced. This is because burn damage was nerfed from 12% to 6%. This made it so that special attackers could finally become good answers to the move, as it would now take far longer for the burns to wear them down. Not only that, but none of the Scald abusers were outright broken either, as the metagame was not kind to Keldeo at all. Speaking Speaking of which, Keldeo didn't even run Scald all the time anymore, as the extra power of Hydro Pump was sometimes crucial in the significantly power-crept metagame. None of the other users were busted either. Pelipper is a good user as it did decent damage in Rain and made for good support on the specific team style it anchored. Meanwhile, Tapu Fini is an excellent abuser as with Knockoff, it was able to stay threatening while also walling things. The same line of logic applies to Toxapex, who arguably does an even better job at it. Now, some of you may think Toxapex would be a problem, but it's not. It's just really annoying. In that case, Scald's looking a lot better. Let's look at the checks. For the first time ever, fire types are generally good Scald sponges. Sure, this is mainly because of how passive Tapu Fini and Toxapex are, but that's not it. Defog also got an increased distribution, which allowed fire types to actually switch in multiple times a game, and made pretty much all of them fine options at the very least. Some were better than others, but that should be obvious. Now though, we look at defensive Scald answers with reliable recovery. Unlike the last generation where I had to put an asterisk on some of these, I don't need to do that this time, and can instead just say the Pokemon's name instead of explaining why they're a good answer. In that case, the list goes as follows: Jirachi, Mega Latias, Pelipper, Mega Sableye, Skarmory, Tangrowth, Tornadus Therian, Toxapex, and Zapdos. Alright then, let's discuss the Pokemon who are immune to Scald's effects. They are Chansey, Clefable, and Tapu Fini due to misty terrain. Outside of that though, I have nothing else to say. I'm just so glad Scald is finally balanced. By the way, Heal Bell and Aromatherapy are only used on Stall and some balance, so that's why I refuse to mention them. A real check to the mechanics should be usable on all styles of team. Anyway, normally it's when discussing SSOU that I end up jinxing myself, but fear not, as SSOU somehow didn't ruin something. Scald, once again, is a move I consider to be balanced. As always, let's take a look at the users. This time they're mostly familiar faces, and Pelipper, Slowbro, Tapu Fini, Toxapex, and Volcanion. The only new face then is Galarian Slowking, who is essentially the specially defensive version of Slowbro, and makes good use of Scald as a result. Onto the checks though, fire types have never been better answers, as they can use heavy-duty boots to nullify the effects of hazards outright. Defensive answers are Dragonite, Mew, Pelipper, Slowbro, Galarian Slowking, Tornadus Therian, Toxapex, and Zapdos. Immune Pokemon are Blissey, Clefable, and Tapu Fini. Well, we're finally finished, right? Scald is currently on No More Pokemon, and God is no longer dead. Thank you so much for watching this one. Hopefully, I constructed my argument well. I often heard BKC and many others complaining about Scald, but I never saw an explanation for why they thought it was broken. So hopefully, I was able to explain their point of view while also helping anti-ban players understand where we come from. With that said, I must say that all of my current projects are very long, so don't expect a video next week. Of course, quality is the #1 priority, so hopefully you'll be able to wait for what could very well be an enjoyable video.